Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. At the dawn of the e-commerce era, if Amazon staked a claim in books and sites like CD Now staked a claim in music, then Reel.com should be remembered as the important dot-com era player in movie retail. But more than just going toe-to-toe with Amazon, Reel.com actually pioneered online movie rentals as well. Reel.com's founder, Stuart Skorman, actually came from the world of video rental stores, and he sold his video chain to Blockbuster. So, the first site to rent you movies via the Postal Service? Reel.com. And more importantly, the site that really pioneered movie matching technology, that sort of art or science of recommending which movie you're really going to want to watch tonight? Reel.com. Now, in the course of this project, I've obviously read a lot of entrepreneur or CEO autobiographies. And to be quite honest with you, most of them are just garbage, basically vanity projects. But Stuart Skorman has written a truly exceptional memoir called Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur: Why I Can't Stop Starting Over. And it's not just an interesting story about an interesting entrepreneur, but the book is actually filled with tons of useful tips and bullet points for becoming a successful entrepreneur. I highly, highly recommend it, and there's a link in the show notes. So today, Stuart Skorman, the founder of Reel.com. Stuart Skorman, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Oh, you're welcome, Brian.
So I always like to get a little bit of background before we get into the meat of people's careers, but you, more than almost anyone I've talked to, have such a varied career, so many different entrepreneurial stories that we probably don't have time to get into all of them. So I wondered if we could just touch on a few early experiences. For example, early on, you managed rock bands.
Yes, that was my first kind of career, and it taught me a lot about marketing.
And what was you grew up in Ohio or the Boston area, I think?
Actually in Ohio, but I went to college in Boston.
Okay, so your rock band managing career was with the James Montgomery Band?
That's right, the original James Montgomery Blues Band.
Tell us about that band, because I actually had not heard of them.
Well, they were kind of the big local blues band in New England for quite a few years, and we made records with Capricorn Water Brothers and did tours with the Allman Brothers, and so they were kind of a big band in their time. And I was, I'm a fifth generation entrepreneur, and and so it was natural for me to, when these friends of mine said, "Hey, why don't you help me manage this band?" It was kind of natural for me to kind of jump into it. And by the way, our partner in most of our concerts, or many of our concerts, was Bonnie Raitt, who later became famous. And it was a little bit like the Jay Giles Band, which was also famous. But I've always really loved marketing and loved getting audiences really excited. Creating a really good customer experience. And this band was a great live band. They were just fantastic at making audiences laugh and applaud and dance and all that kind of stuff. And so it was they were kind of a marketing person's dream in terms of putting on such a good show. And I actually learned a lot from James Montgomery himself. And we were drawing like 2,000 people in concerts before we made records. So it was a very unusual band, and it was that good of a band live. And so let's just say I learned a lot of really interesting marketing lessons from that experience.
Well, yeah, there's so much hustle involved in promotion and things like that in arts that had to be, it's an unusual entrepreneurial background, but it had to be amazingly educational in things like marketing.
Oh yeah, it's marketing. Everything about marketing is creating a strong brand, one that gets attention, and one that people like. And as I say, this band made it easy because they were such a good live band. And, as I say, it taught me, like we were on the cover of the Boston Globe Sunday magazine, and our prices doubled after that. It taught me the value of really good marketing.
Another early few years that I saw in your book, you spent at a grocery store chain called Bread and Circus, which... Not a forerunner to Whole Foods, but Whole Foods eventually bought them, right?
There's three companies that formed Whole Foods, and they were all about the same size, and they all invented the concept together in different parts of the country. So they merged together, and Bread and Circus was one of those three companies that became Whole Foods.
So how did you get involved with Bread and Circus, and what were the big lessons that your years with Bread and Circus taught you?
Well, I've been converted to eating healthy foods and organic and all that kind of stuff, and so I wanted to find a company that represented that value and that excitement that I had, for health, and always wanted to help other people, being a socially conscious entrepreneur. And so I found the best chain of natural food stores in New England, and partnered with them. Basically, started to get them store locations, handled their marketing, and so on. And eventually became a full-time employee and later, an executive and later a board member for 9 years. And so I had a lot to do with, let's say, the beginnings of Whole Foods. And so I liked helping people. I believed in the cause of being socially conscious and helping people be healthy. And I like disrupting. I like doing things where I'm going to make a big change and a change for the better in an industry that needs it. And back then, supermarkets were really unhealthy. It's changed a lot because of Whole Foods, and I'm proud of that. And I still see things inside of Whole Foods where I was maybe the one who originated it. So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. What were the lessons though about? I mean, because that's a physical retail location that's doing retail the old school way. What were the lessons that you learned about pleasing customers and building a customer base and creating a viable marketplace in a retail environment?
Well, there's a bunch of questions there.
Sorry.
Whole Foods, Bread and Circus, that's okay. Bread and Circus, similar to Whole Foods, They were great merchants. So you walked in there and you had fun. It was kind of like eye candy, where everything was visually fun and interesting and fun smells and stories about this is where the corn was grown on this organic farm that we've been working with for years, and all that's it's kind of beyond merchandising. It's marketing. It's brand building. And then we have to listen to customers because this was something new. And one of the things I kind of innovated, it took me a while to convince the owner, but we actually offered double your money back if you didn't like any food for any reason. And of course that got people to experiment and try, a lot of these new natural foods and these new brands that were very new at that time for almost everybody.
So in your book, you describe how it's almost like it's not that you can't stay in any one place very long, but you maybe get a little stir crazy, even especially after things are successful. Like you always tend to have this tendency to want to move on to the next thing. And so the next thing after Bread and Circus, maybe not directly, but eventually in the mid 80s, you get into the video rental business. How did that happen?
Just always loved movies, and went into all these little hole-in-the-wall video stores, and I hated them. I thought they were doing a really bad job with selection and customer service. In a video store, customer service is what we called movie matchmaking, which was helping customers not just say, here's a movie, go home, but make sure we get a movie they're really going to like. And that's part of what made our stores. Our stores were the highest volume and most successful video stores in the country, and I'm really proud of that. And, of course, we had the biggest selection, which was a big deal. We had like 10,000 videos, which back then was a lot in the video stores. But also we had movie experts in the store all the time there to help the customer find something that they were going to like. Everybody has different tastes. and I studied film in college and loved classic movies, and so there was a lot of passion I had for the business, and then I could see it was a new business where most of the people in it, weren't necessarily, serving the customers very well.
I'm interested in this just for a little bit because again, this is an industry that has now gone away. But you said in your book, I found this fascinating, that in the early 80s when video rentals get started, the big money players didn't really get into the video rental game right away because they assumed that video on-demand technology was right around the corner. And so for a long time, it was sort of this wide open plain for mom and pop shops, for small chains.
That's right. There were two dangers that everybody perceived. One was that, which of course a real technology people knew was a long time away, and but that was a perceived danger. You're absolutely right. And the other one was that the supermarkets and drugstores would take it over, so it wouldn't leave any room for the small guy. And so those were the risks. That's why I started my first store in a small town in Vermont, was to be able to make sure I was the biggest one in town, and that in small towns, local makes a difference, in terms of a brand. So that's why I was mostly doing small towns.
And you spoke already about this movie matchmaking thing and focusing on this customer experience, not just open the store doors, let the customer, browse around. You're trying to help them go home with a movie they'll enjoy. And the other thing that I found fascinating was there was good economic reason behind that. Like you said, that you had the best margins in the business because the way it worked, the way a lot of things work, bookstores also function this way, is that the biggest cost to you were the new releases, like the big hits of the time. But if you could convince people, or if you could steer people to older movies, to back catalog movies, to things like that, like your margins were better because those were cheaper.
Well, I know this. You're interviewing me, but you're very smart, and that was the key to making money, was not just new releases but older movies. And it turned out there were so many good old movies. There was a complete alignment between making profit and making customers happy. And that was the thing I loved the most about that business, was that alignment where good business was also what was perfect for the customer.
How big did Empire Video get? Was it maybe half a dozen stores?
It just got to 6 stores, but we were the highest volume and most profitable stores in the country, and I was really proud of the quality of what we did.
You also you try to or Blockbuster comes in early and talks about buying Empire Video from you. It doesn't happen right away, but you spend a few years consulting with them, which is a little close to my heart because my first job in high school was at a Blockbuster. And what was close to my heart is that you were trying to improve their stores. Like, so many things about the way you ran your video store was not the way that I experienced as an employee at Blockbuster. And so I'm curious about your experience at a bigger company, trying to get them to improve the way they do business, improve their product, improve their customer experience, and maybe dealing with bureaucracy and things like that.
Well, it was very challenging. I liked playing a big game so that my movie matchmaking would actually impact a lot of people, not just a few people. And so that's what attracted me to Blockbuster. And it was very challenging. I had one ally there, Scott Beck, who was the COO of the company, and he was very much into this. We actually did the first version of Reelcom together. It was a kiosk inside a Blockbuster store. In other words, it was movie matchmaking, with technology, and then we actually did write our own movie reviews. Like, our typical movie review would be, well, if you like slow moving, dramas, you'll like this, but if you want more action, this isn't for you. In other words, every movie box says, rent me, buy me, I'm the, best movie you've ever seen. And that doesn't help a customer. What helps a customer is somebody more objective saying, here are the people that like it, and here are the people that don't. Right now, they call that crowdsourcing.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and because we had go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because it seems like that's your big idea. Like, that's the thing that excited you, was this ability to enhance, because you take a crack at this several times, this idea of movie matchmaking. And so was it the experience of doing it in these small stores that made you be convinced that if you scaled it up, it could work, nationwide, worldwide, on a larger scale?
That's right. Blockbuster actually trademarked the name Movie Matchmaking. They were so excited about it for a while. And then I was helping them with their Store of the Future projects in Texas, where we were baking in movie matchmaking into the process. As I say, we actually got a computer kiosk up and running in a couple of their stores to test movie matchmaking, because they said they grew too fast and they were bad at customer training and all these things that I'm sure you know about if you work there. And so they wanted it to be more of a technology thing so that they'd be able to roll it out on a big scale. And so that was fine for me, because I like movie matchmaking and I like rolling things out on a big scale. And they had a lot more money than I had to be able to do something like that, and other resources. Let's call it technology.
Well,
But you got it. That's what I love doing: movie matchmaking. Natural foods matchmaking to help people discover products that they're going to like, that are going to make them healthy. And that's what I do. So that's something you'll find in common with almost everything I've done. Is you could call it movie matchmaking.
Well, it's product discovery. It's getting people to that perfect product and that aha moment, really.
That's right. It's both discovery and matchmaking. In terms of helping them, really find what's right, for them, because people have such different tastes. So,
as I mentioned, you do eventually sell Empire Video to Blockbuster, and so then again your entrepreneurial juices get flowing again. I know that you did not have a technical background. You weren't a computer science guy or whatever. So I'm wondering, when you first encountered like the web and the web was starting to take off, did you say to yourself right away, "Oh, this is how I'll finally get my movie matchmaking idea off the ground in a big way"?
You got it. And I actually carried around the first issue of Wired magazine until it wore out. I loved so much the vision they were painting of the future, and I moved to from New England all the way to San Francisco to be part of that. I had a couple friends in the technology industry, and I knew this was the place to be. And so I actually moved here for the reason of starting Reel.com.
So I'm going to put this in context of just for the purposes of years and telling people when this all happened. So I believe you probably moved out there in 94 and 95 out to San Francisco?
93.
Okay.
I took a couple of years. It was a couple of years between that and actually starting Reel.
Right. So Reel.com launches or starts to get going around 1996, but not having the technical background, what on a very literal basis, like, how do you get the ball rolling? Is it about finding people that can help you execute on this idea?
Oh yes, it's very much about that, and it's very much about the experience I had at Blockbuster with the kiosk, and learning from their technology people and learning from the kiosk itself what worked and didn't work in terms of customers interacting with the screen. And so, and that taught me how important technology was. And so I worked really hard to find people that were good, which was really hard back then because there were very few people that understood even how to build a website. So it was, even in San Francisco, it was a difficult thing to do. And the technology people that work with me got a lot of stock, let's put it that way. In other words, they did really well because I needed them as partners, and I knew it.
When you launch, you described it that your initial idea for a while was sort of like a mix between an information service, again, you would be providing the matchmaking, but then also a store, because when you launch Reel.com, you're launching a website, but you actually launched a physical store in Berkeley as well. Was it partially to generate revenue doing something that you already knew worked?
No, the physical store, Amazon's finally getting around to doing it, but I always thought that a physical store was a great brand builder for an online business, and still do.
Interesting.
And in other words, you can come visit us in Berkeley if you want to. And of course, Berkeley was a cool, hip place. And the store was, by the way, the store in the middle of the store was all computer terminals. So you could look up all the movies in the store on the computer first before, using our database, of course, Reel.com, before you had to decide what to do. So it was really this physical store was actually blending, the technology world with the physical world, but also from a brand building point of view, it made us unique.
So you have the physical store as sort of maybe onboarding people to the online experience, and then in the hopes that they'll then get the habit of the online experience?
Well, it's more like online to say we're not just an online business like the rest of them. You can come visit us in Berkeley if you want to. We're real people.
What was
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What was that a difficult thing? I've asked actually several other early e-commerce people. That was an issue early on that you basically, people are a little bit skeptical of the online thing, and so getting them comfortable with online was a major issue.
That's right, and also making our brand stand out from Netflix, which was a small brand back then, to lots of other, Amazon, got into video, fairly soon after that. All these other brands, there were hundreds of, let's say video stores claiming they're online video stores. So I wanted to stand out as a brand, and I wanted to get attention. And also, we were the first online company to open up a physical. We were an online company first, and we were the first one to open up a physical store. And so that was newsy. And then the fact you could trust us, you could just come in and visit us. We're not just online, So it was you call it a brand building thing for lots of ways.
So I believe, again, for the context, that you launched the site around January of '97, and you launched right away with both movies for sale and for rent?
Yes, we did. And even though renting VHS wasn't practical, they broke, they're expensive to mail, they're so big, and DVDs weren't happening yet.
Yeah, that's actually that's something we should point out, is that this is right in the transition period from VHS to when DVDs start to really mainstream around 98, 99.
That's right, and even then, it was around 2000 before there was enough variety in DVDs for it to mean something. And so what I was doing was I was positioning for DVDs, and I was positioning for a rental business, and also it was once again a good brand builder. Say, hey, you can buy movies, or you can just rent them from us by mail, and so we were really well known for that. Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, was a movie buff. He was a fan of our company and later invested in it. But we just knew him as Paul on the phone. We actually had 800 customer service number where people could call and ask about movies. And so once again, it's all about service, and it's all about movie matchmaking.
What was the breakdown in terms of what was more popular initially, rental or sales?
By far sales.
Mm-hmm.
Rentals was a small business, and it was just, I was just positioning for when DVDs finally got to the point where it would be practical. And then the management that followed me actually got rid of the rental. Very famous now, Julie Wainwright. I guess she's always been famous, but she wanted to focus on the sales, and maybe that was the right thing to do at the time.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned how, again, back to the movie matchmaking idea, eventually you have a large editorial staff, and so you're doing your own movie reviews and creating sort of the software to do the matchmaking, right?
That's right. We didn't actually create the software. There was a company based out of the University of Illinois that actually was the pioneer of what's called collaborative filtering, which Netflix later made famous, but we were the first website to have that. So that was called a high-tech matchmaking system. And then we also had our own database of reviews that, I just say, they were objective, and they were short, and they were geared towards, a customer finding something that they were going to like. And so, and then we actually had the database to some extent, from Empire Video before that. So that I just used all that knowledge and that information in building a database. And then what we did was we hired large numbers of local video store clerks. and we found real good ones from really good video stores in the San Francisco area, and they were the ones who actually built the database because they had the knowledge of who likes which movies is the key knowledge.
And you mentioned Netflix already, but what was the competitive landscape at the time when you launched? I think there was another company called VideoServe. Who were you competing with in this space of taking movie sales and rentals online?
Well, there were a large number of stores that were in the business, and then everybody knew that Amazon was going to get into the business, and we were fortunate to become the big brand. Call it good marketing. You know, we had like 5 articles in the New York Times, and you know, we did a lot of good marketing things that made us stand out. I actually met with Reed Hastings. We had a kind of a mutual friend, and we talked about working together, but you know, it didn't make sense. But and so we became the big brand, and that's why we sold for $100 million, and that's why we got so much attention. And I just love creating fun ideas. Like one idea was, what's our best-selling movie at Christmas time? Well, it turned out it was Blade Runner director's cut. And that's the kind of thing that makes news because, you know, that wasn't the most popular movie, but it was online. You see what I mean in terms of let's say the highly educated people that wanted to, that tended to use the internet at that time.
I believe you also maybe had conversations with Jeff Bezos at one point early on about possibly partnering, possibly merging with them before they started to get into the movie business themselves.
That's right, and they were already doing music, and everybody knew the next was video. You know, after because they started with books, and I spent an afternoon with Jeff in Seattle, and we talked about basically him buying our company because he had already IPO'd, and when you're a public company, you have access to a lot of money, and we weren't near that point. And so we had a whole afternoon together. Is really interesting. And maybe the thing I'm most proud of in terms of those days was a couple of years later. This is after after the time when he was thinking of buying the company. That he actually said that we were the toughest competitor he'd had at that point. Call that 1999. And he had a lot of competitors. You know, there was CD Now, for instance, which became a public company that was in music, and a lot of people starting to try to compete with him in books and so on. There were a lot of competitors, including a lot of video competitors, and so I take that as a really big compliment because I thought of and still think of Jeff as about the world's biggest talent.
A couple of questions specifically about that era, about like the what we would call the dotcom bubble era. How important were things like alliances to people like you, like cutting deals with a Yahoo, say, or an AOL in those early days to try to get in front of customers and to get people starting to buy online?
It was crucial, and we had one alliance that really boosted us, and it was called IMDb, the Internet Movie Database. And people today don't know too much about that, but back in those days, it was in the top 10 in terms of traffic on the web.
Oh, I think everyone still knows IMDb, but go on.
Okay, well, and so in any case, we were their ally, and then Jeff Bezos, I think, thought we were a threat, so he bought IMDb. We couldn't afford it. We hadn't IPO'd yet. And so he actually bought IMDb, I'm pretty sure, as a way to potentially, have us not be a big competitor versus him in the movie business.
I wonder if you could also tell.
He's never told me that. That's just my theory.
Right. I wonder if you could tell me also the story, or tell us also the story of the Titanic promotion, because this is something that I feel like went on a lot in the dot-com era. But when Titanic the movie comes to home video, what do you guys do?
Well, first of all, I got to give Julie Wainwright credit for that idea, even though I was kind of a big part of it, and we'd actually already made an agreement with Hollywood Video to sell the company for $100 million before that. So even though the company became more famous because of it, it didn't really affect the underlying business of what we were doing. But yeah, that was a common thing back then, was to give product away to be able to get attention. And then there was so much financing, going into the internet that people could afford to do that. But you're right, a lot of that happened.
So, but you're selling you're selling them for $9.99, but it's costing you $17 wholesale. So it's one of those great dot-com era stories where you're so many people were willing to lose money just to get their name out there.
That's right, and to get attention, and then to get customers, because once you buy Titanic, well, then maybe you're going to buy Blade Runner, or different kinds of things. And then, but the amount of press that generated was huge, which is just very valuable, of course, at any time for any business.
So you've mentioned Julie Wainwright, who comes on as CEO in I think it's around April of '98.
That's right.
It's somewhat rare for a founder to acknowledge and be upfront with everyone and say, I think that someone else that could be better at this than me should come in and be CEO. How did you know that?
Well, the company was growing really fast, and I tend to be a sprinter in terms of, I have a creative period that lasts maybe a very few years. And then after that, I'm not as, I'm just not as valuable. And when I have a company, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like this. It's like my baby. It's like something that I care about so much that if I'm not the best CEO or the best manager, then it's obvious to me that I should replace myself with somebody who's going to be better. And Julie had experience in larger companies. She, worked for years with Clorox and on and on. And so basically, I thought she would be a better manager than I was going to be, and I thought that the company needed that. It was just that simple. It's like if you have a kid, you're going to want him to if you're not, as a parent, if you're not a good teacher of something, you're going to want to take that kid to a good teacher. It's very similar to something like that, where it was my baby and I cared about it. And I've always been like that. I've always been like, I'll be the CEO for as long as it takes. And then when the company, outgrows that, then it needs somebody, better than me in terms of being a manager.
So as we've said, eventually, the Reel.com is sold to Hollywood Video, which, again, for people that might not know, was a large chain like Blockbuster. Why did you sell as opposed to doing an IPO? Because this is, right again in the middle of the dot-com madness. Yes,
I believed that there was going to be a really big crash, and that a lot of these companies that were IPOing were going to do a very big disservice to their investors and their employees and all of the stakeholders that would benefit from an IPO or not. Meaning if the IPO failed, and eventually then everybody would get nothing. And so I was very concerned about that. And so when the board wanted to IPO the company, I kind of vetoed it because I thought I didn't think it was going to work out. And wisdom of hindsight, it wouldn't. By the way, companies like CD Now IPO'd and later crashed so much that everybody lost all their money, literally. And I didn't want that to happen. And I've been a part of booms and busts. Unlike a lot of the younger people that were running the companies back then. I remember a Business 2.0 dinner that I was at where there was a lot of the younger entrepreneurs. And then and there was a question asked, is there going to be some crash, or are these stocks going to keep going through the roof? And there were only two people in the room that thought there was going to be a crash. And we were two of the more experienced people, and it was me, and the other person was actually Meg Whitman. Mm. And so the younger people just didn't have the experience to know that what was going on just wasn't real, like real, not like Reel.com, but with an A.
Right.
And the things like the Titanic promotions and those kind of things, that it just wasn't sustainable, as you were kind of pointing out.
Well, it was good timing, I suppose, to get out then. But I wondered if you could just briefly go into the hungryminds.com story, because again, I feel like that's such an interesting entrepreneurial lesson, because it's another dotcom that you take a run at right as the bubble's bursting, and it's ultimately not successful. But I'm wondering what the entrepreneurial lesson was there at maybe trying to take another run at it after having great success.
Well, timing is everything. Is the long story short. And Hungry Minds was called that education matchmaking, where we were going to be helping people find the right online classes for them. And there were a lot of interesting things that happened. Like, I think we were basically the first customer for this little tiny startup called Google. Mm-hmm. And they were essentially our search engine on the website. And I was coming from idealism. I'd come from the place where I just made X amount of millions of dollars, and I wanted to give some of it back in a way that would help people. And then the education system, was so screwed up, and the online version of all that was going to become so much more efficient in terms of helping kids that are poor or whatever. And so it was coming from an idealism, but it wasn't coming from what I call good business sense, because the idea is great, an online education portal, but it was like 5 or 7 years too early. In other words, there weren't enough classes and things like that were really developed, at a level that people would want for it to be sustainable at that point. And so the big lesson I learned there, and by the way, I knew there was going to be a crash, and so I was just putting some of my money back into it, not all of it. And I was hoping to get in first before the crash and raise enough money to make this sustainable. And then by the way, I got out before the crash finally happened, but I could see it was starting to happen, and I could see I was too late. So that's another timing thing, is, you have to have the right timing in terms of financing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as I've said, we could go on listing all of the different entrepreneurial things that there's elephant pharmacy. So again, maybe learning from your experience with Bread and Circus and trying to take that into a pharmacy model and things like that. I'm curious. Final couple questions here. Is entrepreneurialism sort of an addiction that you ever lose?
Not me. So I addiction's one way to call it. Passion, and then a passion for disrupting or revolutionizing things. Elephant Pharmacy was called that the pharmacies, that were like Whole Foods, but it combined prescriptions and herbs and everything together. And one thing I'm proud of about that is that CVS, the big pharmacy chain, bought the company, and I think we had something to do with the fact that they were the first pharmacy chain to give up tobacco. Mm. Which when you think of a pharmacy selling tobacco, the worst thing in the world, it's crazy. They're part of our healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And so once again, it's a passion for doing creative new things. It's a passion for doing socially good things. It's a passion for disrupting, which means new things that are innovative. And so it was combining all that together. And you're right, the Elephant Pharmacy kind of made use of a lot of my DNA from the earlier days of Whole Foods.
A couple questions about how the landscape and the various industries and niches that you have participated in, how they've evolved today. When you look at Netflix, for example, well, first of all, did you envision a day? Did you feel like in the late 90s that the day was coming soon when we wouldn't be physically renting, little discs that video would be delivered digitally and online?
Yes, a lot of people envisioned that. Even the founders of Blockbuster sold out in '93, anticipating that. And so, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Continue.
No, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
When you look at Netflix essentially having succeeded in that, is that just another timing thing? Like they just happened to hold on long enough till it became viable?
Well, yeah, Reed Hastings had a lot of success in the technology world before that, so he was, let's say, well financed, and so he could kind of be in it for the long term in that way. And so the vision of mail order DVDs, everybody knew that was going to happen to some extent, or mostly, and then everybody knew eventually streaming was going to happen. No one knew exactly when, but as they say, the smart techies knew it was not going to happen soon. And so Reed, he did one thing that was really unique, and that is that he got rid of late fees by starting this subscription model. And so I think it was that, combined with his technology skills, combined with what obviously you can see now are great marketing skills. I think the combination of all three of those things is what made him really successful.
As someone that obviously had this passion for movie matchmaking, I'm curious, what do you personally think of Netflix's recommendation engine and their algorithm for matching people to movies?
Well, that's really interesting because let's stay in the DVD business, which is mostly where he's been even now. And when you have a subscription model, you have an economic interest in people renting less movies. Because it costs a lot: postage, turnaround time. New releases are depreciating fast. All that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people don't realize this about his business model. But unlike my video stores, where the better movie matchmaking that I gave, the more business I would do, the more successful I would be. In his case, before the streaming, let's say, it was exactly the opposite. And so it was important for him to look like he had really good recommendation systems. But it was important for him not necessarily to have good recommendation systems. And you could read complaints even today by large numbers of Netflix customers that their recommendation systems aren't very good. But he had a good reason for that economically for, let's say, 10 years. So he needed to look like he had a good system,
right,
but he needed to not have one.
I had read that early on, it was sort of like not a bait and switch. That's too harsh a term. But the recommendation engine was actually recommending movies to people based on what they had in inventory. Like if a movie was totally rented out or sent out, then they'd recommend you something else and tell you they were recommending because they think you would like it.
That's right. And he went through at least two major lawsuits, class action lawsuits, for doing something called throttling, which meant that customers that ordered a lot of new releases, he sent them very few movies, meaning he controlled what he would send to who, and yet he advertised he didn't do that, and that's where the class action suits came in.
Let me ask you real quick. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you real quick about Amazon also, as someone that obviously competed with them right as they're starting to move from books into everything. When you are dealing with Jeff Bezos in the 90s, did you have a sense then that his vision was to eventually move into everything?
Yeah, and he made no secret of it. And of course, books was the best start because it was a very profitable business and it had a lot of selection. And then he did music, which was the next biggest thing at that time. And then he did videos, but he made no secret about the fact that the books was just the beginning. And I can tell you an interesting story. When I met, I've had different meetings with Reed Hastings, and when I met with him, I think it was around 2005, right after Elephant. He said that there was only about a 20% chance that Bezos was going to compete with him. And the reason was this was still part of the stock market crash of the dotcom scene, and that Bezos couldn't afford to have any money-losing businesses, and to get into that business, it would take money, before it became profitable. And so he was pretty confident that, and that's why Bezos didn't get into it, is that
for a long
timing-wise,
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Timing-wise, he couldn't afford it. To have a money-losing business versus his book business, which was making money.
So Netflix got that sort of window of opportunity there.
Exactly, because had Amazon got into it earlier, they were very powerful financially, brand-wise, et cetera. People that buy books also, watch movies, and so they had a lot of advantages. But Reed was very confident, and of course he was right, with some hindsight.
So, final question. There seems to be a lot of nostalgia for physical movie rental stores. I'm curious about how you feel about the death of Maybe not even just movie rental stores, but physical retail in general.
Well, very mixed. There's a lot of progress that's really cool. Unfortunately, most video stores were like typical Blockbusters, where they weren't really very good at movie matchmaking, so they weren't necessarily adding a lot of value. But there were some video stores that were really good at it, and the loss of those and that interaction where, like in my stores, customers would come in and they'd be talking to neighbors and talking about movies, and it was a community thing, and they would also be able to interact with really knowledgeable experts, clerks, that could really help them. And so I think there's a real loss in all that, and there's even a loss of DNA in terms of getting a really creative feel. Even though there's plenty of data about who likes what movies or whatever, there's very little data about who likes what movies and why. And if you don't know why they like the movie, the data is really limited in terms of its value.
Because the Netflix model still is like, well, other people liked X, Y, and Z, so you should. That's right. Right.
But that's very much of a blunt instrument. And because people, especially in movies, and there's other areas too, where people's, they're so complex. It's not like one person. We're like different people. Like I am one kind of person when I'm in the mood for a comedy, and I'm another kind of person when I'm in the mood for sci-fi, and everybody's like that. And so what they do is very much of a blunt instrument.
Well, Stuart Skorman, thank you for coming on the show, remembering all those great stories for us. I'm going to say again, his book is fantastic. It's on Amazon. Definitely, I read it on my Kindle. It's called Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur, Why I Can't Stop Starting Over. You just have such a fascinating story, so thank you for sharing that with us.
You're very welcome, Brian.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.